So you ready for this?
I don't know what to do with my hands. How's it going, everybody? My name's Ryan Whaley. I am the second shift woodshop manager here at PRS. Been with the company almost 14 years. And today I'm going to take you through our core neck process. When it comes to building guitar necks, there's a quick way to do things and there's a right way to do things. Here at PRS, quality has always been our driving force, so you know we do things the right way. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get out on the factory floor and see what's going on. So our core necks begin their journey back in our rough cut area. Our raw shipments of wood come in. They are cut down to neck blank size, which is essentially just a giant plank of wood. They will go into our hot rooms for a few days, and when they come out, they'll get stacked and prepped on the factory floor. Here we see Herman grabbing a stack of mahogany necks, and he's going to be prepping these for the location hole for CNC. There's going to be a relief cut, which he's tracing now, and that relief cut will actually turn into the ears for the neck. Herman's got years of experience, so he's really got a good eye for detail as to where in that relief cut specifically the best match for those ears is going to be. And that way we get a good solid match with wood grain and color later on. And he's marking them with the current date, and then he'll number them in sequential order. So once that relief cut is done, those ear blanks will be cut. They'll be moved over to a shelf. The neck blanks, once they are cut through CNC, will be cut in sequential order and then marked with the date they were ran off of the blank that Herman's running now. So that way, once it's time for ears to glue up, it's an easy match for the neck blank and the ear blanks. After the location holes are drilled, we're doing the relief cut now, and you can see the two markings, one for the ear and one for the neck blank itself there. And that blank right there is what we will make our ears out of. Safety first, always making sure to put your guard back down after using the saw. It's good etiquette, Herman, I like it. Here we have Herman going over to the planer, and he's going to plane down these ear blanks so we get a nice smooth surface for when we eventually do cut those ear blanks out. The bandsaw tends to leave the not straightest line, so this will help clean this up for our good final product for those ear blanks. Now that we have everything planed down, it's time to cut the actual blanks out of the relief cut. There's that good etiquette again. Way to go, Herman. And this is where we will locate all of our ear blanks while they're waiting for those necks to process and eventually come back around and get those ears glued on. The necks will then go onto a staging rack for Pre-CNC. The Pre-CNC program will smooth out that relief cut and put the initial angle of the headstock on the neck blank. Here we see Herman bringing out a cart of neck blanks that have had Pre-CNC run. You can see that initial headstock angle. This is one of our hot rooms, specifically for mostly neck blanks that we use. All of our hot rooms are set to different temperatures, and depending on the species of wood, really determines how long it will sit in that hot room. The bake and dry times are very important. That way, once the guitar is finished and the customer has it, all the moisture is out of the neck and that neck is completely stable, so you don't have to worry about your neck moving on you right after you get your guitar. After our necks have sat, Herman will bring them out so they have time to acclimate on the shop floor. The blanks will get put on a staging rack, and when they're ready, we will start our stage 1 process. Here we see Sean loading up our CNC machine with our neck blanks that are ready to be ran. We always tap them down, ensure that suction's good. If you hear a little rattle when you tap it with a hammer, you know suction's not good and you need to check your part. This is going to fly cut and level the top of these neck blanks, give us a nice smooth surface, cut a relief for our truss rods. This is actually going to carve our truss rod channel and the truss rod nut cavity. This will make 2 passes. The first pass is going to remove the bulk of the material, and the second pass will clean up that channel. So when we go to put truss rods in, it's a nice clean surface and we get good adherence on both sides of the truss rod, top to back. Here we see the CNC carving out the beginning stages of what will become the heel tab that will eventually get glued into the guitar. You can kind of see now where that headstock shape is starting to take form, and those smooth sides on either side are where we are going to glue our ears onto. Clean out those truss rod channels real nice. Usually we'll hit it with a piece of sandpaper just to get it that much cleaner before it passes on to the next guy who actually installs the truss rods. Here we are copying what model the neck is going to be onto the heel tab. So it's just another visual representation for the next guy down the line. Here he's marking the back of the headstocks for when we level the back. You know if the grease pencil's gone, the fly cutter did its job, and the back of that headstock is nice and level. Here we see Brian Self grabbing a stack of our necks that have fresh truss rod channels in them, and he's going to take them back to his area where we're going to start the truss rod install process. Brian's just going to double check and make sure all those truss rod channels are nice and clean, visually inspect them for any tear out, any impacted sawdust or wood dust. Brian's been with us a long time. He's got a very good eye for detail, and he's very good at what he does. If he finds any tear out or excess anything, you take an X-Acto blade or a piece of sandpaper and just clean that cavity out. Again, that way there's no obstruction for when we put our truss rod in. Here he's counting out his truss rods for the amount of necks that he has to glue up at the moment. Make sure they're nice and clean, rubbing off any excess debris that could be on the truss rod. Again, we want to make sure that there's good adherence between the truss rod and the neck itself. It seems simple enough, but there is a process here. What we really are trying to do is get that seated in the best position. The truss rod nut needs to be set at a certain height. You don't want it too high or too low, because then when you try to adjust the action for your guitar, you're only going to be able to move that truss rod so much, and you might not be able to get the desired result. Brian adjusting the fit, giving it a tap, make sure it's seated down to that truss rod channel. And what Brian's doing now is adjusting it to the left all the way to the right, and then bringing it back to a neutral position. And he's going to repeat that process for each neck. That neck blank is now ready for insert. Our inserts are carved out of mahogany, and right now Brian is essentially sanding either side of that truss rod insert. Insert too thick, you run the risk of cracking the neck. If the insert is too thin, you don't get good adherence, and there could be gaps between the insert and the neck truss rod channel. So it's really important to take that time to make sure that that insert is the appropriate fit for the neck blank. Here we're using some Elmer's wood glue. Get a nice bead up either side, and then distribute it evenly across that insert. Start up top towards the truss rod nut, and here we have our press. And it's important to use the specific right amount of pressure. Too much pressure, the neck will crack. Not enough, truss rod will rattle. He's taking his time, ensuring that that insert is seated all the way against the truss rod and into the neck. He's putting the tape over top of the insert, so when we put it in our press, any glue that may seep out or leak off of that truss rod insert does not get onto our press. Into the press it goes, and after the necks are in the press, they will sit for a minimum of 4 hours to allow for good adhesion between the insert and the neck itself. They will collect the ear blanks that were cut from the relief earlier. They'll line them up with the headstock angle, make sure wood grain looks correct, everything is color matched as closely as possible. Then the ears will be hand clamped and put underneath of the truss rod insert table to dry overnight. After that, the necks will go to our CNC again for what is called our 2A, 2B stage, which will drill our tuner holes and location holes for our fretboard. After that, we are going to load our necks onto what is called our stage 3 jig. It's a side view jig. As you can see, that headstock shape is there, but there's still a lot of material on the heel and the back of the headstock. This program is going to clean that up for us. And it's going to trim up the back of the neck, and again, also give us more what our final headstock spec should be before sanding. You want to make a few consistent passes. If you remove too much material at once in the CNC, you run the risk of causing excess tear out in the neck, which is only going to cause more work to fix and fill later on. Different woods like to react differently to CNC. Your softer woods are pretty easy, they'll cut through like butter. Some of your hardwoods, as like rosewood or maple, if you don't run them slow enough, they will cause tear out or cracking. After that, we see Sean taking our necks and staging them on the rack here. We tape them off and date them as a visual representation as to when they were ran, so they know when they need to get ran next. And these necks will sit for 72 hours before we go to our next step, which is fingerboard glue-up. So if there is any movement with the wood, that it can be adjusted before we put the fingerboard on. Here we have Corey doing our fingerboard glue-up process. He's going to scan the neck blank from our ModCat sticker, and that will tell him what location the fingerboard is located on that belongs with that neck. We have different scale lengths, different frets, so it's important that he's paying attention to what he's doing. dry fit the neck, ensure that it fits correctly, there's no bowing or gapping. He's going to slide that down and stage that for when he's ready to put epoxy on. Here we have our 2-system epoxy. It's important we get the right mixture. He's just covering the neck in that epoxy and making sure we have a consistent, even coverage. This ensures that there will be no gapping between the fingerboard and the neck itself. Drop that neck onto the location pins, ensure that the fit is right. Clean off any excess epoxy that may have seeped out in pressing that fingerboard down. It always does happen. Here we're using one of our cauls that's specifically shaped for the fingerboard that we glued onto the neck. That way we get a nice good fit in our press and consistent, even pressure. Same style press that we use for our truss rod inserts. Those necks will sit in those presses for, again, 4 hours, and then after that those necks will be staged and they will wait another 48 hours after that before they are carved. Here we see Sean again loading our CNC for our stage 6 carve. Right now, still sharp edges, a little bulky. After this, you'll really see that classic PRS guitar shape come out. Trimming the heel tab a little more. Here we're fly cutting the heel to make sure it's nice and level. And here we are doing the outside diameter of the neck. It'll trim down the headstock a little bit more, clean those ears up. And here we're using our ball mill to carve our contour shape. You can really start to see that neck take shape right now. And here we're doing our transition from our headstock to our neck carve. And that just makes it easier on the sanders when they start their process. So after the carve is done, we'll remove all the fingerboard tape. The reason we tape those up is to ensure that the fret slots that are in the fingerboard do not cause any loss of suction while they're in the CNC. Stage them back on the rack. And these necks will sit for 48 hours, again, to allow for any movement to occur before they go to our fingerboard level process. Here we have Kyle doing our fingerboard contour. Paul really likes that we do this by hand. He's using his jig right now to check for any light that's coming through between the jig and the fingerboard itself. Helps you identify any low or high spots that may still be there. Checking his level of the fingerboard. It's really important that that neck is level when we start that contour process. If your neck is not level, you're not going to get the contour you need. Ideally, the length of training, it would take about a month, roughly, to get somebody efficient enough and trusted enough to let them do the job on their own. Here Kyle is trimming up the nut slot, cleaning up any excess epoxy that may be left over from the fingerboard glue-up process. And now we're going to start our headstock leveling process. Kyle using our jitterbug sander. This process is much more difficult than people realize. Trying to maintain a specific thickness and stay within our specs, side to side, front to back, it takes some handwork. So you start with the jitterbug, finish up with hand blocks. And right here, he is checking the level of that headstock to make sure it's consistent and flat all the way across. Checking that level against the light. Again, looking for any shadows, any gaps. Checking the specs of the headstock to ensure that it's still within our tolerated specs before it goes to veneer. We're obviously looking at a condensed version of this process. It is not uncommon for our fingerboard levelers to level the headstock, level the neck, check it against their jigs, go back, make adjustments, check it again. And again, that is just to make sure we are sending the finest product forward that we can from each stage. So by the time it reaches the end of the line, it's the PRS quality we are known for. We make the finest production guitars in the world, and that all comes from properly trained individuals, following process, checking specs, and being invested in what it is they're doing. Through checking their specs, using their jigs and visual checks, he can identify when that deck is done and ready to go to the next stage. Check our level one more time before we send it off. That looks like a level neck to me. Here we see Joey, another member of our fingerboard level team, and he is about to start our fretting process. Here we're going to drop a bead of glue into usually 4 fret slots at once. And the reason for that is we want to get those frets dropped into those slots in enough time that they go in smoothly and the glue has not started to set yet. Depending on the neck will determine what fret it gets. And here we'll take our press, seat those frets in. And it's important to get a good feel for this process. If you go too heavy with your pressure, you run the risk of causing little micro cracks around the frets into the fingerboard. Not enough pressure, you're going to have high frets. High frets lead to string buzz. So again, taking your time, ensuring that you're doing the right thing, and you're checking behind yourself after you completed a process. Here we have Joey checking those frets he just placed against the light trying to identify if there's any high frets on either side. If everything looks good, he'll take it over and put some glue accelerator on it to get that glued in set, dry it off, and then we're going to move over to clip the end of those frets off with our pneumatic fret clipper. Got his safety glasses on, earbuds in, safety first, paying close attention to what you're doing while you're doing it. I'm digging it. Here he's using those pneumatic fret clippers to trim off any excess off of the side of that fingerboard. Here he's going to take it over to our floor sander, and we're going to cut that approval angle on the edge of those frets. Our approval angle is essentially the angle of the frets from the top of the fret to where they eventually will be rounded over into the fingerboard. If you've ever played one of our guitars, first time pulling it out of the box, that guitar should feel and play like it's been your favorite guitar for 20 years. And that fret angle and the subsequent roundover of that plays a huge part in that feeling. This is probably one of the most difficult parts to train people on because it's an intimidating piece of machinery, but it's also very precise as far as where you need to lock your hands in to get that desired angle on the edge of those frets, which he's going to take our angle gauge now and ensure that the angle that he put on those frets is where we want it. And after he's clipped the frets, cut the approval, you want to double check for any high or low frets. It needs to be consistent up and down the neck and on both sides. If everything looks good, they get staged on the next rack and we will start our veneer application process. Here we got Mike cleaning off the headstock veneer, checking our nut slot before we start our veneer process, making sure the headstock has been leveled to the right spec. Do a couple cleanup passes on this before we actually apply our veneer with a finer grit, get some scratches on that headstock so we get good adherence between the glue, veneer, and headstock itself. Quality control at its finest right here. Mike double checking the work from the guy behind him, ensuring that that headstock is nice and level. Consistency is key here. We're checking these necks at every stage in production, ensuring that those tolerances and those specs are where we want them before we proceed with doing any more work. If everything looks good, we are going to sand an angle on the bottom of that veneer. And the reason we do that, if we glue it on with it flat without an angle, there's going to be a slight gap at the top of the veneer where it meets the nut. Checking his angle, again, very delicate touch. If you add too much pressure to the back or to the top, the veneer is going to sit crooked on the headstock. Get a nice even coverage of our glue on the headstock, side to side, top to bottom, ensuring there's no spots where we've missed any glue. It's always good to touch the top of the head or top of the veneer where it's going to meet that nut. Clean out any residual glue from our tuner holes. Set your nut, move your veneer around a little bit, ensure that that coverage is consistent. Clean out any residual glue that may have seeped out when applying pressure. Once we have it straight onto the headstock, we're going to tape it in place, top to bottom, ensuring that that headstock veneer does not move before we clamp it down. Have our hand clamps and that piece of plastic that lays level across that veneer, and then we are going to clamp that veneer down to the headstock and allow dry time before we clean them up. That way we know we have good adherence between the veneer and the headstock itself. Everything looks good. It will go onto our rack and allowed to dry before we start our cleanup process. These are all necks here that have come out of the clamps. They're dry and they're ready to start the cleaning process. So we're going to unclamp them, remove all of the tape that we put on previously, set it on this jig to route out the veneer to our final tuner hole size. Takes a delicate touch. You go too hard with the router, you're going to change the shape of that tuner hole. And here Mike's going back with our X-Acto knife and any residual glue that is hardened around the outside of the veneer on the side of the headstock. He's just trimming that up so when it goes to the sander next, it's a nice clean surface to start beginning the sanding. And here Mike is not necessarily cutting away any material as much as he is knocking off dried glue from the side. Once that process is complete, Mike will walk over to our sanding racks, place them on there, and now they would be ready for a sander to grab and start their process. Here we have Drew. He's our first shift trainer. Giving a quick visual inspection of the neck, looking for any defects, tear out, again, checking for any of those high frets. Everything looks good, then we'll start our process. Here, Drew is using our 150 drum sander to sand down the sides of that headstock. And this is, again, something that takes quite some time in training to ensure that we are getting a nice smooth surface on the side. We're not angling that headstock too far one way or the other on the side. As you can see, it's not straight in. He kind of swipes to the side a little bit, and that's to follow the contour of that headstock. After that's good, we'll take it over to our 220 wheel here, and we'll clean up some of those 150 scratches. It takes a delicate touch, and here we're cleaning up some of the top of the ears, get rid of some of those residual CNC marks before we start our hand sanding process. Here, Drew's checking that headstock against a template to ensure that there's still enough material on either side before he starts sanding. Everything looks clean. It falls within the specs the template says it should. Then we're ready to go. Here, Drew's going to check his specs for his headstock thickness to ensure that everything's within our tolerance before we start sanding and leveling the headstock. You may be thinking we just leveled the headstock 3 or 4 times. Why are we leveling it again? That is because with the glue and the veneer being thin, it will soak up some of that moisture. You may get a little bit of an uneven surface. So this is just going back over that and ensuring that that headstock is nice and level. And again, this is a process. You will level, check your level, make any hand sanding adjustments you need to, check your specs, and go through that process until it's where we need it to be. Here we're doing the same thing. We're leveling the headstock just on the back, and we use a different sanding pad than the headstock because it's easier to get that round pad into the transition between the headstock and the neck carve to give you the desired result. Again, using the hard pad, cleaning up any of those residual marks from CNC on top of the ear. It may seem like Drew is just kind of going at that ear, but he knows what he's looking for and how to make that sander do what he needs it to do to get the desired result. And here we're using 150 usually to start and hand sanding that neck carve. Again, cleaning up any marks left over from the sander or the CNC. Here we're going to file down the edge of those fret tangs if there's anything sticking out from when we clipped them earlier, smoothing those out. And then right here, we're sticking the side of those frets to clean up any marks from the floor sander that were left. Going back over that contour, cleaning up any residual CNC markings, and we'll go through a process of 150 all the way up to 280 to smooth that neck out. He's going to check his specs on the half fret and the 12th fret, ensure it's within spec after sanding. Again, check for any high frets, feel the edge of those fret tangs, make sure there's nothing sharp sticking out, nice and smooth, check your heel carve. Our neck sanders are very good with their sense of touch. They can run their fingers across the neck, find flat spots, dips, tear out rough, and that's what we're seeing here. Once that process is complete, that sense of ownership, Drew's going to sign and date his neck. Beautiful. Once that's done, that will go into our QC box and await QC to give it our final inspection. Drew's marking off work completed. Here we have David checking that template again, checking those specs. Again, quality is the name of the game here, so we're checking and double checking at every stage to ensure that we're sending forward only the best. David is our QC guy. Started out as a neck sander, moved up, like most of us here do. Just over 13 years ago, I started at PRS, and I started out as a neck sander. I had great trainers, and through that, after I sanded necks, I had an opportunity to do veneer application. Once we started S2, I was brought over into that department to help kickstart that, and I was doing a lot of neck construction. From there, I moved into CNC operations. I ran CNC machines for our neck process for about 5 years. Luckily enough, I was given the opportunity to take over the second shift neck team. And then from there, kept building my knowledge, building my team, and finally graduated to taking over the entire second shift woodshop, which is a point of pride for me, to be honest with you. A sander or a QC person, one of their greatest tools is their bench light and looking for any shadows that may move. If you see, a bright spot in between 2 dark spots, you know that there's a gap there or something's been over sanded. Here, David is checking our round over to ensure that it breaks over where we want it to. And you can see him shaking that neck back and forth, checking that round over, checking for any sharp frets. Again, checking our level, front, back, side to side. If there's any minor things left over from our rough sanding process, David will clean this up. It's usually a quick couple passes with some 280 maybe, double checking the work done. Looks like David noticed something here, so he's going to grab a piece of sandpaper, give it a quick touch up. That can be a bit of a tricky spot, that transition from the heel into the neck carve itself. Cleaning up that headstock level, sure it's nice and smooth, no residual scratches from the rougher grit sandpaper. Touching up that headstock round over just a tad, using our fine pad, cleaning it up real nice. He will initial the heel tab. That's just a sign of work accomplished. It also adds a sense of ownership in the products that we work on. Here we see David scanning it into our system, reporting the work as finished. essentially letting our system know that that neck is ready to be picked and glued into a body. Paul Smith always likes to say, you haven't built a guitar until you've built a guitar neck. And you got to see a little bit of that here today. At the end of the day, each and every one of us is proud of what we do here, and we really hope that translates into the guitar you're sitting with now. Thank you guys for joining us today, spending part of your day with us here at PRS on the factory floor. Have a good one.